co-CEO of DC Studios, James Gunn, has been making a bunch of new changes that will undoubtedly affect the future of the DCU. One of the biggest announcements he's made is that the DC Comics video games will now be connected to the wider DC universe. In today's video, we're going to be discussing what this means for the cinematic universe and what the fans think about it. So let's dive right in. Starting off, future DC Comics games will be connected to the cinematic universe. Recently, James Gunn confirmed on Twitter that future DCU games will be connected to the cinematic universe. The exchange started with a fan asking if DC characters would also be getting more TV shows now that he was in charge. To this, he answered positively. James stated that he wanted the DCU to be connected across films and TV. He was then asked if there were any plans to have the games be connected to the DCU. He once again responded quite favorably. While James did say that not all the games would be connected, he still made it clear that there could be games in the future that will potentially have some connected to the cinematic universe. Could this mean that once the DC cinematic universe is up and running, we could be getting games that are set in that universe? That would certainly be quite interesting. More importantly, it's a fresh idea from the DCU, which we haven't really seen in a while. The MCU hasn't really made use of their games all that much, and if DC could do it more effectively, they'd finally be able to do something that the MCU didn't already beat them to first. Though from the looks of it, the idea is still very much in the early phases, much like many other aspects of this upcoming cinematic universe. Guess we'll just have to wait and see what James and Peter have in the works. Next, how have fans responded to the news? Because of how rather abrupt a lot of the changes that Gunn has made recently, fans aren't really open to anything he's doing. While some did have positive reactions, a lot of the fans are just tired of all the changes he's making. A fan posted on Twitter that he's got a son who's gonna be graduating in game design very recently, and they were wondering where they could send in his resume. Some other fans felt like the entire idea was lazy and that the DC universe should leave their games alone. The games are already considered to be amazing in terms of the storyline. Fans feel like they don't need the DC universe stepping in and potentially messing things up. Someone else mentioned that Gunn should take note of why the Arkham series and Spider-Man PS4 did so well. They're highly praised because they're original, and they're not at all restricted to the franchise's film counterparts. Limiting future games to that could be a problem and may result in poor storytelling. A tweet also pointed at the fact that games just take too long to make. Imagine if in the future they would try to have a movie and a video game release at the same time because they were narratively linked. That would mean the movie would have to be delayed quite a bit just due to the fact that video game development is a long and arduous process. It's safe to say the idea isn't without its own pitfalls and issues that would need to be resolved. Plus, the fans may have a point that this could be James's biggest DC mistake. We're not surprised to see the reception of this idea hasn't been too positive. Though, to be fair, much of anything that Gunn does at this point is gonna be met with some backlash. Still, the points that fans have raised do make sense. DC-based video games need to be stranger and wackier. They don't need to be homogenized and made to be part of a shared continuity. The entire charm of video games is that you get to see and play something that would not otherwise have been available in films or TV shows. This is especially true with the DC universe, which has a rather eclectic tone. Recent adaptations like Doom Patrol have done a pretty great job of capturing that, while recent DC Comics games have tried to stay clear of this. Offering a much more generic AAA production around recognizable characters, we think anchoring them down into the cinematic universe would just cement this mediocrity. To be fair, Gunn has left behind a great deal of ambiguity by simply just answering yes to the question when asked on Twitter. We still don't know to what extent the DC cinematic universe is going to be involved with the gaming side of things, but the idea itself just feels so counterproductive to storytelling in the video game medium that we can't help but think it's gonna be a mistake to do. Not to mention, if everything had to be connected to a film, Batman Arkham would not exist. Sure, it would have been great to see a video game with Henry Cavill's Superman, or one about Ben Affleck's Batman. Some fans might even want to see what a Flash game could look like with Ezra Miller. There's no denying that if there was a game coming out, then it would certainly help out a ton with the cross-promotion of the movie. But the fact of the matter is that ultimately, none of these benefits would be worth it if it meant that the storylines featured in the game would be bogged down and restrictive. Most gamers see Batman Arkham as the holy grail of superhero video games. Not only is it praised for the presentation and gameplay, but fans also feel like its dynamic storyline is an all-time classic because the story follows its own unique continuity. It never feels bogged down or restricted by anything else going on in the DC universe. This allows the writers to have their own iconic Batman characters and surprise fans with amazing twists, like the death of the Joker. Other games like Batman the Telltale series also made use of clever twists that left many fans in awe. Imagine if the stuff you were seeing play out in these games was just a rehashed and fast-forwarded version of a movie you had just recently watched. The excitement and allure of it would just vanish, and you'd get bored pretty quickly. That's not even taking into account the amazing storytelling that we had lost out on. Next up, this is probably why Marvel hasn't done this yet. While it would be cool for DC to try to perfect something that Marvel hasn't, the thing is that there's probably a reason why the MCU decided not to tie itself to gaming quite early on, despite the fact that we've seen the cinematic universe dive into television and animated shows. Gaming has been something that's largely been left alone, and the issues we've discussed above are probably the reason why. They've kept the door open for original projects like Insomniac's Spider-Man series and the upcoming Wolverine game. They've made it so the developers could tell their own original stories without needing to sit around and wait for the MCU's approval on what they're allowed to present and what they aren't. Connecting video games to an ever-increasing roster of films and miniseries just feels like hampering their progress for no reason, though we've seen that the MCU tends to have an impact on their games to some extent. Much of this is because of the developers being influenced by the cinematic universe themselves and wanting to add bits of it to their game, rather than being told by someone like Feige that this is something that they have to do. Giving game developers the choice and freedom to make games as they see fit should always be the top priority, and we've seen with Insomniac's Spider-Man and the Arkham series that this leads to great results if done properly. Moving on, having a shared continuity is pointless because of the multiverse. The fact that the DC multiverse exists is reason enough to not have a shared continuity between the films and the movies. Gunn could simply state that Rocksteady's Arkham series is just one of the many DC multiverses, though at that point, we're wondering why it's even necessary to establish a connection in the first place. Alternatively, they could do something similar to the Arrowverse, where brief cameos and imagery could be used to highlight a shared continuity. It may be possible to take existing properties like Gunn's Peacemaker series and try it out in a video game format to see if they work or not. But it's safe to say that if every video game project moving forward has to abide by what the DCEU is doing, then there's very little hope for proper storytelling in future DC video games. Every Marvel fan has often found themselves going back to Insomniac's Spider-Man games when the MCU starts feeling a bit tiring to them. And so, if the video games are just more of the same for DC fans, then it could stop them from trying out the games at all. Ultimately, their goal should be to embrace their own originality and focus on grander storytelling instead of being restrictive to the contents and storylines of the DCU. And finally, DC Comics games need more creative freedom. The only way that these games can succeed is if they're able to keep audiences on their toes and always have them guessing what's gonna happen. To do this, you need some effective storytelling and actual stakes. It's not really possible to have people be excited about what's being told to them if they already know the events because they've seen them in a previous movie. Most creative freedom and fewer limitations are just about the only way to ensure that the DC Comics games don't suffer from being redundant. Going back to the example of the Batman the Telltale series or Batman Arkham Asylum, it's fairly clear why these games turned out to be as good as they did. Their stories were meaningful, and they offered lasting consequences that didn't have to worry about any kind of issues with continuity. We can understand why Gunn may want to capitalize on gaming, considering it's still a growing medium, and having collabs between the movies and games sounds fun on paper, but the lasting issues that this idea creates are also worth consideration. And with all that, that's a wrap for this video. What do you think about future DC Comics games being connected to the cinematic universe? Comment below, give the video a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.